Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Swenson. I'm the media specialist at Edina High School, and today we're so glad you could join us for an Edina Reads program. Edina Reads is a community-wide reading program that encourages active reading, lifelong learning, and thoughtful conversation. Our vision is to use the power of literature to create connections and deeper understanding amongst the diverse people who live, work, and go to school in Edina. Today, we're excited to spend time with National Award-winning book author Pete Hautman. Welcome, Pete.
Well, thank you. It's good to be here. I talk to so few people these days. It was a treat.
Well, we're so glad you could join us. As we start our time together today, would you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I live in the Twin Cities area here, in the moment in Golden Valley. I grew up in St. Louis Park. And I probably wanted to be an author from a pretty young age. Or rather, I wanted to tell stories. I was more interested in comic books and visual arts, things like that. But I thought for many, many years, I thought I didn't have anything to write about because I grew up in a suburb, an economically stable family with a lot of people who looked like me. And basically, I thought that my life was pretty boring. And it took me many years of thinking and trying and learning things before I realized that I did, in fact, have stories to tell. So I started publishing at the advanced age of 40. And since then, I've published 33 novels, I believe. And it's a great way to make a living if you don't like money, but it provides me with a comfortable living, and I'm going to keep doing it for as long as I can. My books range from mysteries to science fiction to love stories to romantic comedy. One of my more recent books, Otherwood, is sort of a horror story. And the book that I wrote before that, Slider, is kind of a semi-realistic comedy about competition eating. Mm-hmm. So I like to jump around. I like to keep myself entertained. I'm not one of those authors like R.L. Stein or Sue Grafton or Lemony Snicket that can kind of write the same thing over and over and over again. I love authors like that because I like reading series, and I like to know that there's another book coming, that's going to give me exactly what I want to expect. But that's not what I do. I jump all over the place, and I disappoint my fans as often as possible. So that's probably enough about me. Maybe we could go to some questions.
Yeah, for sure. We've got one here. During these historic times, how is staying at home going for you? Is it impacting your writing?
Yeah, I'm not hardly getting any writing at all done. Every day I get up and I go to my desk and I'm going, okay, now I'm going to work on this chapter. I'm doing revisions on a book right now. And the next thing I know, I'm looking at the news and I'm reading about coronavirus, and I'm reading about politics, and I'm reading about what my friends are doing, and just the time goes and I'm not getting any writing done. And that has to change. But I'm going through a non-productive period right now. And that happens sometimes. I don't call it writer's block. I just think of it as sort of a pause. And maybe there are things going on in my head that I'm not even aware of that when I get back to writing will help me to solve the particular problems. One thing, I used to think that writers were kind of these solitary creatures that would, sit in an attic, with a fountain pen and a tablet of some sort, and they'd reach deep into their imagination and things would come out. And what I've found, both for myself and from virtually every other writer I know, is that writing is very much a social activity. We need other people. We need other people to bounce ideas off of. We need other people to look at our work from time to time and tell us where we've gone off to the side. And I didn't quite realize how much my work depended on my social interactions. And I'm kind of an introvert, I'm not a party guy. But this has really underscored to me how much, we're all in this world of the mind, we're all in this world of imagination together. And when I write something, if I write a paragraph and 100 people read it, they're going to read 100 different paragraphs because they're all bringing their own kind of life experience into it. So, yeah, I don't like this at all, and I would like it to be over, please. Thank you.
I think the students and the adults in their lives who are listening in today would agree 100%. I know at our house, it's being on these screens all day long is tiring, and we miss seeing our students face to face every day. I miss them so much.
Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah. So what does your writing life look like when it's not a time of pandemic? If we were not social distancing and if you were just doing what you normally do, describe a day of a writer's life, and at least for you, what might that be?
Well, a fairly typical day might be that I would get up and maybe work a crossword puzzle or do something to, pass the time while I have my coffee. And then I'd sit down and I would read whatever I had written the day before, which might only be a couple paragraphs. It could be a couple pages. It could be as many as 10 pages, rarely. And I'll reread it, and I'll go through and I'll make some changes, and I'll think about what has to happen next in the story. And maybe I'll write a few more paragraphs or a few more pages. And I usually don't do that for hours and hours and hours a day. I'm not that kind of writer. I do know people that do that. They'll just sit down and write for 8 hours. I don't get it. I could not do that. I'll write for maybe an hour, maybe 2 hours maximum before I need to clear my mind by, taking the dogs for a walk or having a little snack or a nap. I'm big on naps. And just kind of get my head out of the writing zone. And in the afternoon, I'll usually respond to emails and phone calls and things like that, deal with kind of the business aspect of writing. Mm-hmm. And I'll probably go back and I'll look at what I've written, and I might make a few changes, and I might write a little bit more. And I might take another nap. 2 naps a day is my idea of ideal. Get some exercise and read. I do a lot of reading during the day. I probably spend more time reading than I do writing, which is, I think, absolutely key for any writer to immerse themselves in some kind of literature. Whether I used to go. I tell this often. Before the internet, such a wonderful thing. I spent a lot more time in libraries. Like every day, I'd go to a library, and I'd always be researching something. And I'd grab a book here and there. And as I was walking out of the library, I'd sort of drag my hand along the stack of books and grab a book at random, put it on the bottom of the stack, and check it out without even looking at it. And it might be something like How to Raise Earthworms on Sawdust. It might be a Dick and Jane book. It might be any bizarre thing you could think of. And I just look at that and I would go, okay, somebody wrote this book and it has information in it that other people find interesting or valuable. And I'm maybe not going to read the whole thing because I don't want to know a whole lot about raising earthworms. But it's a fascinating business if you like worms. And that might get my mind going like, well, what about if I had a character that raised earthworms? What kind of character would that be? Would they fit into the story? And that kind of thing, it gets my writer's imagination going. I still go to libraries a lot. We're talking once a week now instead of 5 times a week. So.
No, I love it. With my teacher ear, I hear you saying, and I'd like to say it again out loud for all the students who are with us today. Here's a writer who writes, and then he gives himself enough time to come back and reread and revise to make a better product. And so students, as you're working on your papers for school, and those of you who are aspiring writers as well, please remember that revision is a big part of the writing process.
Absolutely. In fact, I probably spend more hours revising than I do writing. I certainly spend more time revising. And I like it. Now, my partner, Mary, who's also a writer, she hates revising, but she does it anyway because she knows she has to. I love revising, because it's almost like when you get to the revision point for me, if I've written a description of something, say, and then I'll look at it again and try to figure out how to make it better, how to make it shorter, how to make it more vivid. And it's almost like working a puzzle, just moving words around. Maybe you can move words around and all of a sudden you can make them more comprehensible or more powerful or any other number of things. I've done an exercise when I visit schools where I have the students write a sentence down. It'll be something like, the dog ran across the street. Mm. And then I'll have them revise it. And then I'll have them revise it again. And then I'll have them revise it again. And we'll do like 10 revisions of that sentence. And pretty soon you've got the yellow lab galloped across the street being narrowly missed by the truck, or they get so bored by writing the same sentence over and over again. It forces them to think of some way to make the thing interesting.
Right, we have to add an adjective. We have to have some action. What is the dog doing?
Yeah, what's the dog's name anyway? And thinking about something very simple, it brings up a lot of questions, and that's what a lot of revision is figuring out how to make things more something that someone would want to read and would find engaging.
I love that. I think about all the emails I send throughout my day and how many times I slow myself down just to even revise something as mundane as that so that my thought process is clearly communicated. But maybe now I should add a dog into those emails. That would be more fun.
It can take me half an hour to write a short email. I'll fiddle with it. And what's really it has been an interesting thing for me is being on Twitter, where you're very limited in how many words you have, and you might want to try to express a complete thought. And that can be really tricky. I mean, one way you can do it is replace the word to with the numeral 2. I mean, there's mechanical things you can do to shorten it, but there's also stylistic things you can do, and it's kind of fun trying to figure out how do you get this into 286 characters or whatever it is.
Yeah, no, I like that puzzle too. I think it's 140, and I often find I need to write it and maybe pause and wait before I hit the tweet button, but sometimes the tweet button gets the better of me. You just never know. Earlier you were talking about your books. I just want to remind everyone who's with us today that Edina students have access to a whole wide range of Pete's books via the Overdrive link in your portal. So please do take advantage of that. And for our public library friends who are joining us, you too have access to Pete's books in the Libby or the Overdrive app through the Hennepin County Library website. So please do take advantage of those and read, because there's so many good books to explore. And so Pete, I wanted to ask you a little bit more about that. You mentioned earlier you write across genres. How do you do that? You write realistic fiction. You've got some teen romance. You've got science fiction. You're all over the place.
Yeah, well, I like to read a lot of different genres, and if I'm writing, I might have an idea. For example, there's the book I'm revising right now. I've got pinned up on my wall here my editor's description that she wrote in the contract, her synopsis. And it was a middle grade novel featuring a young girl who grapples with the utility of the conscience.
What does that mean?
It means she was raised Catholic, and so was I. But that's kind of the idea of the book. Now I have to figure out, like, that was my core idea, was dealing with that question. What is the conscience for? Why do we have a conscience? I mean, think if we didn't have a conscience, all the things we could do. We could just kill off our enemies. We could take money that didn't belong to us. I mean, we could break up with a boyfriend or a girlfriend and walk away, and it wouldn't bother us because we would have no conscience. But how am I going to tell that and make it interesting? And what it turned out to be kind of a horror story that has intelligent rats, a mythical kingdom, a man who lives to be 300 years old, and a lot of other kind of weird elements. It could also have been a science fiction novel, but I wanted to try to write a horror novel, so I'm framing it that way more. But I mean, every story has clothing that can make it look good or not good. And you can, a lot of books I'll read a fantasy novel, and I go, you know what? If this had been more like a contemporary love story, it would have been a much more powerful piece. So I see it as my job to find the right genre for the characters, to find the right characters for the genre and so forth, and puzzle them together. I mean, I wrote a book called The Big Crunch, which is it's a contemporary love story about two 16-year-olds who fall in love, and there are no princes or princesses. There is no evil dictator. There is no buried treasure. There's no, terrible disease. There are no vampires, no horses. It's actually set in a place very much like St. Louis Park, Edina, or Golden Valley. It's in the suburbs, and these kids lead fairly uninteresting lives. And that was probably the greatest challenge for me as a writer, to figure out a way to frame that as a love story without any genre stuff in it, without any of the bells and whistles and things. And it was hard to write, but it was very successful. I mean, I think I succeeded, or so I'm told. I like to. I find out that almost any project that I undertake, the ones that work out the best for me, whether it's in writing or anything else, are the ones that kind of scare me. The ones that make me nervous, and I'm going, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I have the tools. I don't know if I have the strength to do this, whatever. And it kind of forces me to become more creative and to figure out a way to do it. And it also makes me a lot prouder of the work that I've done too, if I can, kind of overcome that initial fear. You hear that a lot from actors. They talk about, how the fear of failure is kind of has the seeds of greatness within it. And if you're, once you're cocky and you think I can pull this off and this is going to be no problem at all, well, that's when you get boring.
So I like all that. And I'm just thinking about applications for my own job and things. But two, I want to go back to, you mentioned this offer from your editor to write a middle grade novel about a student with a conscience. And that makes me think of Godless, your National Book Award winner. And was there something similar in the inspiration for that?
Godless, I wanted to write a book about the beginnings of doubt. And I wanted to write a book about the difference between faith and religion. And the main faith and religion thing is that, okay, you can have faith without being religious. And you can be religious without having any faith. And, or you can have both if you're if you're lucky, you get the right combination. And I wanted to write it in a way that wouldn't turn people off. I didn't want to scare away everybody who's a person of faith. I didn't want to scare away anybody who's an atheist. So I thought, well, how can I make it really absurd? Maybe I'll have some kids start their own religion. And the first thing I thought of was, I know I'll have them worship fire hydrants. And I thought, well, fire hydrants just aren't that worshipable. They're all rusty and dogs pee on them and stuff. Well, maybe I'll have them sun worship. And I go, well, no, that's a little bit too close to some of the South American religions. And then I actually remembered when I was 15, I and some of my friends did a sort of a mock religious invention. We decided that we would worship the St. Louis Park water tower. And so we came up with a whole plan about, how the water tower is the source of life because there's water coming down from it and it has 10 legs. And said, okay, well, what about, that can be the male deity. Should there be a female deity too? We decided that the Edina water tower, the one over by Southdale that doesn't have legs, it's just that swoopy post, that would be the female deity. And the scary looking Golden Valley water tower, which is kind of this squat thing with 13 legs, and it was painted this really ugly gold color at the time. This would be the god of war. And so it was sort of a thought experiment on a 15-year-old level. And I hadn't thought about it in 35 years. But as I was trying to figure out a way to frame this book, I said, hey, I can just pull this out of my own childhood because I've been there. So that's how that evolved.
That's great. I think as a reader, what I appreciated also about that story was not only the creativity and the student voice, but just I think you were ahead of the time in your chapter headings. That was before chapter headings kind of became a thing, and that structure, for me as a reader, was helpful to know. I think you had arranged the chapter headings so that each one was sort of a part of the credo of, is it Schuttengottianism? Am I saying that right?
Schuttengottianism. Yeah, that was a part of the Schuttengottian Bible that the character Shin was writing. And that was actually the very first thing I wrote. Because originally it was going to be a prologue, like a 2-page prologue. And I thought, I don't like prologues. I skip them a lot of times when I pick up a book, especially if they're in italics. I'm a bad reader that way. And well, maybe I could just break it up into chapter titles. And that seemed to work pretty well.
Yeah, no, I think it's engaging for readers. It helps them go with the story and know where the characters are and what they're doing. You mentioned earlier the inspiration for Godless around town, and I know in some of your other books, like The Big Crunch, but also in What Boys Really Want, you've named places around the Twin Cities. Is it important for you as an author to bring those pieces into your work, or does it vary with what you're writing?
Well, it's easier. I know in Slider, I said it in Vacaville, Iowa, which is a town that doesn't exist. But I had to do a lot of research on that, driving around Iowa and looking at small towns, kind of getting a feel for them. Mm-hmm. And I wrote a book called Road Tripped, which is about a kid that drives from the Twin Cities area down to he's heading for the Gulf of Mexico. He steals his dad's car. And that took a lot of research too. In fact, it took driving up and down the river, which was interesting. But I think the local area, like How to Steal a Car is another book that was set right here in the neighborhood, kind of where I live. And it's let's just say I need a reason to set something someplace else. In Otherwood is set in a fictionalized version of where I grew up, which was about halfway between where I am right now and where you are in St. Louis Park. There was this enormous wooded area. It was much more rural back then. Mm-hmm. There was a farm within a half a mile of us at the time where 169 and 394 crossed. 169 was a little 2-lane county road at that time. And so I set it in the neighborhood I grew up in next to a woods. I made the woods a little bit bigger in the book. You know, I do a lot of changing things around, but it was that was really nice to do because that was such an important part of growing up, of being there and, you know, with all those woods around, and it was fun to write.
And I think the Obsidian Blade series, is that set in kind of eastern or western rural Wisconsin? But the inspiration
Obsidian Blades is set more in southern Minnesota.
Okay.
But the southern Minnesota in part that exists 10,000 years in the future. And it's also set on the North Pole in 1959 and in Jerusalem in the year 33 AD. And a few other places there too, but yeah, that jumps around a lot because that's a big series. I mean, it's you know, it's very far-ranging.
Yeah, well, not everybody has a portal over the roof of their house, right?
That's true, and I don't know why that is. I mean, we don't have flying cars either. Come on, people are spending all their time trying to find a vaccine for coronavirus when they could be building flying cars. I don't get it.
I know. Where's the creativity? So as you were growing up, was there a book you liked to read as a kid? Did you like being read to?
Yeah, I got read to a lot. And boy, I don't know. It's hard to pull a favorite out. I know one that made a big impression on me when I was really young was The Little Engine That Could. And I still think about that book. You know, it was very inspirational for me. And I probably didn't read a lot between first and fourth grade. But around fourth grade, all of a sudden, somebody handed me a book called Big Red, which is about a boy and a dog. And I just was completely blown away by it. And I read everything that author, Jim Kilgard, had written. And I read all the Nancy Drew books and all the Hardy Boys books. And I started reading my dad's Western novels and his spy novels. And yeah, it was like a world opened up. It was just wonderful.
Yeah. Well, that's the power of books. And that's why we're so excited that you're talking with us today, right? So we can share that with other folks.
Yeah.
I have a question here from a student. If one of your books could be made into a movie or a TV series, which one would you like to see that be?
Oh, good question. Well, I've had a few of them optioned.
Oh.
Including Godless, and Mr. Was has been optioned several times. And that's when somebody buys the rights to a book and then they get like 2 years to find somebody to finance a movie and get a director signed up and all that. And some of them have had scripts developed, but they've never gotten past the who's going to pay the millions of dollars to make this stage. But I think Otherwood would be a really good movie because it's very spooky and suspenseful. Mr. Was, which was my first young adult novel, that would make a good movie too. I'd like to see that. That has time travel and weird stuff going on in it. So a lot of good visual stuff. But I don't know. I have mixed feelings about. I would love to see any of my books made into movies because they pay me money. And if it was made into a good movie, that would be even better. But unfortunately, most movies are not very good. I use stronger language here if I was with, other company, but I think I'm fearful that someone would take a book that meant a lot to me, a book that I loved, and do something just terrible to it on the screen. Like maybe a lot of you have read Hatchett by Gary Paulsen.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful book. He's a really good writer. I love that book. It was made into a movie about 25 years ago, which was one of the worst movies I think I've ever seen. It was just horrible. And I don't know how Gary feels about that, but I'm sure that he doesn't like to think about it at all, because it was a really amateurish effort. So I have mixed feelings. But yeah, overall, I would love to see someone try to make one of my books into a movie.
That's great. I have another student question for you, and that is, what is your favorite book that you've written?
This week, it would be Otherwood, because I've been thinking about it a lot. And the book that I'm working on editing now is kind of related to Otherwood stylistically. Mm-hmm. So I've been thinking about it. I'd like to make the new book as good as Otherwood. I wrote a book called Invisible, mm-hmm. which is my favorite book because it was the easiest book to write. I wrote that in a first draft in 5 weeks. Revisions took 5 months. And then editing beyond that took another 3 or 4 months. But Invisible was a really fun book to write, because I just sat down every day. I sat down and I'd write several pages, and I never had to think too hard about what happened next. I knew what was coming. So, I thought, wow, I figured out how to write a book now. This is going to be so easy from now on. Mm-hmm. But the next book took me 4 years. So,
oh my goodness! But you didn't give up. That's what matters, and that's the little engine that could, right? That's why that
exactly
story
right.
sticks with you.
Yes.
For our aspiring writers who are listening today, what could you tell them about the revision / editorial process? What does it look like once you have your book?
Well, once I've finished a draft of a book, I'll usually put it through about 2 rounds of revisions, which means sitting down with it and reading through it and making changes all the way through it, going through and making the changes on the hard copy, and then doing the same thing over again. Mm-hmm. Usually I'll let it cook for a couple of weeks between revisions to let my mind relax. A lot of times it's very hard to edit your own work, because you're reading along, and what is going in through your eyes, your brain is turning into what you want it to be and not what it really is. So one has to kind of like step back a little bit from a book. Mm-hmm. At that point, it goes to my agent, who a lot of times will suggest a few more changes. And when she's satisfied with it, it'll go out to a publisher. And if the publisher decides to buy the book and publish it, then I will get usually a letter, but sometimes a phone call from an editor discussing the whole shape of the book and the big issues within the book. And that can be just a few minor changes, or it can be major. The one I'm working on now, it's major. I'm going to be throwing away about 25% of what I've written and writing about 25% more completely different stuff. And that's based on a phone conversation with this particular editor. Oh. And then I'll send it back to her, and then she'll come back with more specific recommendations, what they call line editing, which is kind of like a sentence by sentence critique of it. And when we get that where it needs to be, and by the way, this process, after a book is sold, it takes 12 to 18 months usually for it to get published. And after the editors had her say in it, she'll show it to her assistant and some of her colleagues a lot of times, and they'll chime in. And then it'll go to copy editing. And the copy editor is the one that checks the spelling. The copy editor is the one that says, your character has blue eyes on page 4 and brown eyes on page 56. Which is it? The one that will say, you've got 2 characters named Frank in this book, and that's confusing. Or when I wrote How to Steal a Car, I had my characters go to a McDonald's at Winnetka and Highway 55. So this copy editor in New York says, well, I looked it up, and the McDonald's is actually 2 blocks north of Highway 55.
So Google Maps has changed editing.
Yeah. So copy editors have saved me from stupid mistakes so many times. They'll tell you if you've got a character that has a 6-shot revolver and you have them fire 7 bullets, well, they'll tell you. Well, they're great. And the funny thing is, all copy editors have really tiny handwriting. Really tiny, really neat, easy to read handwriting, because they're putting marks on paper manuscripts, and they're having to write between the lines.
Oh yeah.
Now most copy editors are editing electronically.
Sure.
Which is in some ways better and in some ways less good.
But I'm thinking of our students who are listening today. Talk about jobs that you may or may not know that are out there. And for somebody who really likes to read and is good at tracking details, that could be a possible career. I would not have known about that, until later on in life. So how interesting to know that there's such a wide variety of opportunity out there for people with different skills.
Yeah, well, there's all kinds of, different editors. Like a copy editor would probably make a lousy acquiring editor because they have a hard time looking at the whole shape of a story and the shape of a book because they're very specific, detail oriented, and an acquiring editor would make a lousy copy editor because they don't have that, being able to look at it, a manuscript one word at a time and figure it out. They're just different personality types. And it requires both of them. I mean, you got me, the author, and you've got the acquiring editor, who's kind of like the honcho, and then the copy editor. Oh, and then there's proofreaders. After the copy editor is done with it, it goes to proofreaders. And they're the ones that figure out, well, there's a double space between these 2 words, and there's a comma here when it should have been a period. I mean, they really get down to the the micro level. They imagine them, like with a magnifying glass or something going through it. And after all that's done, then they produce what are called galleys. And a galley is like the book. It's typeset and everything, but it's not the final thing. It's you get it in a book shape, and then I have to go through and reread it. The copy editor rereads it. The editor rereads it. And a few other changes can be made. And then finally, it turns into a book. I wrote a book called Rash. And it went through this whole process. And I got my box of books. It's always very exciting. You get this big box from your editor. They send me like 15 copies of the book. I open it up, and on the first paragraph, there's a misspelling.
Oh, no.
It was, I can't remember what it was. It was like, instead of the, it said he or something like that. It was a dropped letter. And I thought, wow, why did they do that? That must have happened in production. I went back and all the way through my original manuscript that I sent to my publisher, that mistake was there. And none of all these people who had read it caught it. So...
Interesting. Yeah. I want us to go back to Otherwood because I have a question from a student here.
Yeah.
They want to know a little bit more about that book and know if you have a favorite quote from that book or a favorite paragraph to share.
Oh, well, I kind of like the paragraph that Kelly Barnhill wrote on the back of the book.
Well, who could say no to a nod from a Newbery Award-winning author and fellow Minnesotan? That's lovely.
Yeah. Well, there are. It would be hard for me to find a favorite paragraph right now. I'd have to kind of page through it. But I do like. I know in the flap copy, it's a quote from Grandpa Zach. He's a character that doesn't survive past page 3.
Oh dear.
But he says, hatred combined with lies and secrets can break the world. Which I think about when I look at the news. You look at, all the things, whatever side of the political spectrum you're on, no one can deny that there's a lot of hatred and lies going on.
Yeah. It's a lot to take in right now. One last question for you here. Is there a poem, a song, an essay, or a story that's been sort of a touchstone for you during this historic time, this time of pandemic?
Now, that's a very good idea. I should read some poetry. I haven't been reading poetry lately. And that's a really good way to kind of find a place for yourself in the world, to see it through different kinds of eyes. I wouldn't say that there's anything that I go back to a lot. Well, the little engine that could helps.
Right. For me, I find that to be Anne of Green Gables. Her pluck is inspiring day after day. She has some grit about her that just kind of is inspirational.
She is a fantastic character. Some of my inspiration in literary characters are Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm, who was a few years before Anne of Green Gables, but a similarly plucky character. Anne of Green Gables and my gal, Pippi Longstocking. I love Pippi Longstocking.
Oh, sure. Can't go wrong there. There's another way to frame that conversation that I've heard from some librarian friends lately, which is, what would Jo March do? So if you're in a situation, Jo March of Little Women, what would she do? And really, you can change that up to whatever your favorite literary character is. But that's sort of a fun conversational gambit as you run into people from a social distance and want to talk about things.
Well, what would Jo March do? Probably would lead you to a reasonable outcome. If I go, what would Pippi Longstocking do? She might shoot you.
Yeah, that'd not be so good.
No.
Wonderful. Well, Pete Hautman, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. Thank you, Edina Public Schools students, families, and Edina community residents for joining us for the Edina Reads program. Be well and stay safe.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.